welcome back. I'm going to keep on reading Zach's Lie. We're starting on page 8 here. So, moving into page 8, where we left off. We just left off where Joanne and Jack's mother were, all of them were pulled out of bed, and they have some people in the house that are not exactly guests, and they're asking for his mom to talk on the phone, but saying specific things. So I'll kind of start where I left off, and we'll keep going. So Patricia Osborne closed her eyes tightly. "They will kill us if you talk," she said quickly. The man flipped the phone closed. "What now?" she asked. "We will wait." He backed into the shadows. "Who are—" A man came behind her and put a fresh strip of tape over her mouth. The Osbornes did not know how long they waited. The men stood silently in the shadows. The phone rang. The man flipped it open. Once again he listened, then flipped it closed. He whispered something to the man who had brought the water. The man went back into the kitchen and returned with the white timer Mrs. Osborne used for cooking. "We will be leaving you in a few moments," the man with the gun said. "Before we do, I wish to make something clear." He paused, looking directly at Mrs. Osborne. "We're very serious men. If you call the police or tell anyone about what happened this evening, we will come back and kill you and your children. We will also kill your husband. You have my word on this. There is no place you can hide if you break my trust. I will find you wherever you go. Do you understand?" She nodded. "Good. Remain quiet, and this will become nothing more than an unpleasant memory for you." The man who had gone to the kitchen handed him the timer. We will leave now, but before we do, we will free the boy's hands. You will remain where you are without moving for 1/2 hour. We will be watching." He stepped back into the light and put the timer on the floor in front of Jack. "When this rings, you may free your mother and sister, but not 1 second before. Do you understand?" Jack nodded. A man came up behind him, pushed him forward, and cut the tape around his wrist. The men left the house. They heard a car start in the driveway and back out. Jack looked at his mother. She shook her head vigorously and nodded at the timer. Jack tried to rum some feeling back into his hands. He reached up to take the tape off his mouth, but his mother and sisters shook their heads no and stamped their feet on the rug. The man hadn't said to leave his gag on, but he waited. When the timer finally rang, Jack ran into the kitchen and found a pair of scissors. He cut his mother free first, then Joanne. A moment later, they were all holding each other and crying. "What's happening, Mom?" Joanne asked over and over again. "What about Dad?" Jack sobbed. "I don't know," Patricia Osborne said. I don't know." They took showers, then sat at the kitchen table in their bathrooms trying to figure out what had happened. The most logical explanation was that Neil Osborne had been kidnapped. He spent a lot of time in Central and South America doing business, and kidnappings were not uncommon there. Mrs. Osborne was certain that the next step would be a ransom demand, but she was afraid that Neil would try to do something heroic and get himself killed before she could gather the money to pay them. During the Gulf War, Neil had gotten into trouble for refusing to leave a downed pilot on the ground. He circled the area until a rescue helicopter arrived. On his way back to the base, his jet ran out of fuel and he had to ditch it in the Persian Gulf. They sat at the table until dawn, and that's where the police found them when they stormed into the house. The back and front doors were kicked in at the exact same moment. "Police! Freeze! Keep your hands on the table!" Armed men and women wearing black jumpsuits, flak vests, and helmets swarmed into the kitchen, handcuffing the Osbornes before they could stand up from the kitchen table. "House is secure," radio crackled. 2 men came in wearing gray suits. "Patricia Osborne?" one of the men asked. She nodded. "DEA," he said. "Federal Drug Enforcement Agency. I'm Agent Pelton, and this is Agent Dayton. We have a warrant authorizing us to arrest your house and all of its contents." "They're arresting our house?" Jack thought. Agent Pelton sat down at the table. "Are we under arrest?" Mrs. Osborne demanded. She had just about enough. "Technically, no." "Then why have you handcuffed my children?" she shouted. Agent Pelton did not react to her angry outburst. "It's really for your own protection, Mrs. Osborne," he explained calmly, "and our officers, of course. Most folks tend to react negatively to having their homes ransacked. I know I would if it were mine. I can have the cuffs removed if you promise not to interfere with our activities." Mrs. Osborne took a deep breath to try and calm herself. "We won't interfere." Agent Dayton unlocked their cuffs. It sounded like a troop of mountain gorillas were tearing their house apart. Two men came to the kitchen and began dumping drawers of silverware onto cardboard boxes. Jack wondered how a spoon could break the law. Maybe we should go into the living room, Agent Pelton said. It might be quieter. The living room was quieter, but not much. Why don't you all sit on the sofa and relax? Agent Pelton suggested. The Osborns looked at the sofa. Before the police burst in, they had decided to get rid of the sofa. We'll stand, Mrs. Osborn said. They watched as a parade of men and women flowed in and out of the front door like ants. They came in empty-handed and left with their arms filled with the Osborns' possessions. Parked in front of the house were two big moving trucks surrounded by flashing police cars. The front yard was cordoned off with yellow tape stenciled with the words, "Crime scene." Standing beyond the tape were several neighbors, two of whom were being interviewed by local television news stations. What's this all about? Mrs. Osborne asked, with a great deal more calm than she felt. What do we have to do with the DEA? All I can tell you, Mrs. Osborne, is that your husband has been arrested. He's alive? The question momentarily threw Agent Pelton. Of course he's alive. Thank God, Mrs. Osborne covered her face with her hands and began sobbing. Your husband is currently in federal custody, Agent Pelton went on. Where is he? Jack asked. Brownsville, Texas, but we'll be transporting him to this jurisdiction later today. Is there a reason you thought he was dead? No, Mrs. Osborne spoke quickly. We haven't heard from him and we were worried. It would be best if you told me the truth, Mrs. Osborne. That is the truth, she insisted. Why is he in custody? A man came over and told Agent Pelton that they needed him in the kitchen. Excuse me, Agent Pelton said. What's going on, Mom? Joanne asked. I don't know. What does Dad have to do with drugs? Jack asked. Nothing, Mrs. Osborne said. I mean, I don't know. Listen, she lowered her voice. We need to stay calm. I'm sure it's all a big mistake. Maybe we should call an attorney, Jack whispered. Agent Pelton came back into the living room. I want to call my attorney, Mrs. Osborne said in her calmest voice. No problem, but before you do, can you explain this? He held up a plastic evidence bag. Inside the bag were wadded strips of duct tape. Duct tape? Mrs. Osborne shrugged as if it was the most normal thing in the world. I know what it is. Where did it come from? The garbage can underneath the kitchen sink. That's not what I meant. I used some tape to seal a box I mailed out. Right. Then where's the spool? It wasn't in the kitchen. I don't know, I might have used it all up. Then where's the empty spool? It wasn't in the garbage can. I have no idea. Right. Agent Pelton looked at Jack. Jack, isn't it? Jack nodded. Can I see your hands, son? Jack glanced at his mother. She nodded for him to go ahead. He held them out. Agent Pelton looked carefully at Jack's wrists and forearms. Have you been shaving your arms, son? Jack shook his head, wondering what Agent Pelton was talking about. You seem to be missing a lot of black hair on your wrist, Agent Pelton pointed out. He held up the tape. Oddly enough, there are a lot of black hairs stuck to this duct tape. He looked at Mrs. Osborne. You weren't wrapping up your son, were you? He walked over to the sofa. The white timer was still lying on the carpet. Agent Pelton pulled a plastic bag out of his pocket and put the timer into it. No matter what happens, Mrs. Osborne whispered, don't say a word about last night. Agent Pelton felt the sofa cushions, then sniffed his hands. Do you have pets? Jack flushed bright red. He knew what Agent Pelton had smelled. No, Mrs. Osborne said. Okay, let's stop beating around the bush. How many were there? Mrs. Osborne looked him right in the eye. I don't know what you're talking about. Did they threaten to kill you? Mrs. Osborne did not answer. The only way you'll be safe is with us. We can protect you, Mrs. Osborne. We can protect your children. I want to call my attorney. I'll get you a phone. Chapter 3. So this is italicized. This is Jack writing in his journal. Mom called her and Dad's attorney, June Saunders, who has been a friend of the family since before they got married. She came over and talked with Agent Pelton for a few minutes, then told us to get dressed. June took us to a hotel and we checked into a double room under her name, and that's where I'm writing this. I want you to all go to bed, June told them. What you need right now is sleep. While you're recovering, I'll try to find out what's going on. No one knows you're here, and I want to keep it that way. If the phone rings, don't answer it. And for heaven's sake, don't answer the door unless it's me. I don't want you talking to any reporters or the police for the time being. What about Neil? Mrs. Osborne asked. I'll try and get in touch with him and let them know you're okay. Just go to sleep. That's the only priority right now. I'll bring back some takeout. June returned about 4 o'clock in the afternoon with Chinese food. The Osbornes looked a little better after a few hours' rest. Jack started opening the cartons of food as soon as they hit the table. Joanne sat in a chair, staring numbly out the window. Patricia, who had just stepped out of the shower, was brushing her hair. Is there some place we can talk privately? June asked. This concerns Jack and Joanne as much as it concerns me, Patricia said firmly. You're the boss. June put her briefcase on the coffee table. What have you found out? A lot, June grimaced, and none of it's good. I had a long conversation with Agent Pelton, who seems like a pretty decent guy. He said he would give us more information after you consent to an interview. I've tentatively scheduled it for tomorrow morning. Patricia put her hand up. I haven't decided if I'm going to talk to him or not. You might not have a choice, but we can get into that later. Tell me what's going on. June opened her briefcase and took out a yellow legal pad filled with notes. I'll start with Neil. I wasn't able to speak to him, but I did get in touch with his attorney. His attorney? Patricia repeated. I thought you were his attorney. Not anymore. He retained the services of Benjamin Bender. He's a very expensive and well-known criminal defense attorney, who, by the way, suggested that you talk to him before you talk to me. I told him I would pass that on before we got into any details here. What's that mean? We have a couple of ways we can go, Patricia. We have a couple of ways that we can go, Patricia. I can advise you as your friend, or I can advise you as your attorney. Either way is fine with me. Mr. Bender wants to represent you and Neil. He said that Neil requested it. But you can hire whoever you want to represent you. It's your call. I want you as my attorney. I'm not a criminal attorney, June began. It might be best. We're not criminals, Patricia snapped. Okay, sit down. June motioned her into a chair. I know you've been through a lot, but you need to stay calm. Let me tell you what I know. She explained that Neil Osborne had been arrested for drug trafficking. He was being held in the federal detention center downtown. Their case is pretty solid. They have photographs, videos, phone conversations. They've been on his trail for over a year. A year? That doesn't seem possible. How could Neil? You told me yourself that you haven't seen Neil for more than 2 weeks in the past 4 months. June looked at Joanne and Jack uncomfortably. That since he bought the airline company, he's been pretty scarce around the house. When Jack's father had left the Navy, he had become a commercial airline pilot. The job paid well. It had bought them a big house in the suburbs, nice cars, good clothes, and great vacations. But after 5 years, Jack's father got fed up with flying busloads of irritable passengers over the same boring routes. When Jack fell out the window, his father took a long leave of absence to consider his options. He decided to buy a small airline company based in Texas and began flying cargo into Mexico and Central South America. Since he had bought the company, he had been away more often than at home. And when he was home, it seemed to Jack and Joanne that all their parents did was argue. The arguments had gotten so bad during the past year that Jack and Joanne were worried their parents would split up. Patricia pounded the table with her fists. I just don't understand how he could get himself into something like this without my knowing anything about it. June reached over and took her hands. You'll have plenty of time to think about that later. Right now we have to figure out how to get you out of this mess. What's going to happen to him? Are you sure you want me to talk about this right now? She glanced at the kids again. Yes. Well, if half of what they appear to have on Neil turns out to be true, they could lock him up and throw away the key. Mrs. Osborne covered her face with her hands and began crying. Joanne and June put their arms around her and joined in. Jack had thought the men coming into their house was the most awful thing that had ever happened to him, but seeing his mother like this was worse. After a while, his mother got up and went into the bathroom. She came back a few minutes later with her face washed and a determined look in her eyes. "What does all this mean to us?" she asked. "That's the big question," June answered. "Agent Pelton doesn't think you're involved, but he does think that these people are trying to get to Neil through you." "What people?" Patricia asked. "What's he talking about?" June stared at her for a long time without saying anything. "Agent Pelton is convinced that somebody came to your house last night and had a conversation with you. Is there any truth to that?" "No." June took her hand again. "You can't do this on your own, Patricia. You've got to think of—" There was a knock on the door. June walked over and looked through the peephole. "It's Benjamin Bender. I've seen him on talk shows. I guess he didn't trust me to pass his request on to you." "Should we let him in?" Patricia asked. June shrugged. "I don't see why not, but watch what you say. I'll jump in if I think he's getting into sensitive areas." She opened the door. Benjamin Bender strode into the room as if he owned it, walking right past June Saunders to Patricia. "Mrs. Osborne, my name is Benjamin Bender." He wore a three-piece charcoal gray pinstripe suit and a starched white shirt with a yellow silk tie. His dark tan made his super white teeth look like fresh snow. "Your husband has retained me to represent you." "So I've heard," Patricia pointed to June. "This is my attorney, June Saunders." "Ah, yes, Miss Saunders. I believe we've spoken on the phone." He gave her a small nod and then turned to Jack and Joanne. "And you must be Joanne. Your father said you were beautiful." He wasn't exaggerating. Joanne rolled her eyes at Jack. "And Jack," Bender continued, "you look a great deal like your father." Jack did not like Benjamin Bender. And my timer is going off. So join me tomorrow and we'll keep reading a little bit more. Talk to you later, guys. Bye.